so happy to have Susie Petruccelli, author of Raised a Warrior, back on the show with us today. Thanks so much for joining us. We wish these weren't such serious issues to talk about today, but thank you so much for the time.
Thank you guys. I'm always happy to be here.
Well, before we get to this serious stuff, though, the last time we had you on, I loved the interview, but I loved the Twitter exchange we had with you afterwards, where your 14-year-old had overheard our conversation and was approving, said, "Good job, mom." How cool was
Yeah,
that? Because that was cool
it
for
was
us to
very
see.
cool. Right. Yeah, you know how it is. Teenagers are pretty hard on their parents. So, to get his approval, and I wasn't even asking for it. He just said it out of nowhere. It was so nice.
That's
And it was
awesome.
my son, so it means even more.
The heart of sports, bringing families
Yes.
together since forever.
Yes.
We'll get into the heavy stuff now, and then we'll rotate back to other stuff. This is obviously you're somebody who's been in soccer for your whole life, so I can't imagine what this time is like for our listeners who aren't familiar. About 2 weeks ago, The Athletic published a story that really rocked the world of women's soccer. A bunch of women in the NWSL accusing a prominent coach, Paul Riley, of sexual coercion. In the wake of that, we've seen the commissioner of the league resign. We've seen the coach fired. The controlling owner of the Washington Spirits has stepped down. As someone who's seen this her whole life, how challenging is this story for you to see and really offer commentary on right now?
It's definitely heavy. It's definitely heavy. It's definitely sensitive for sure to talk about. But for someone who grew up in the soccer world, I'm not surprised. Everyone I know, as we've been talking the last few weeks since the story came out, everyone I know who played the game with me, we all know players who married their coaches. We all, knew, we've all had seen instances of abuse over the years, all different kinds of abuse, racial abuse, sexual harassment, verbal harassment about, the way players are playing. So it's not really a surprise. It's very common. I think the level that, Paul Riley took the abuse to with his players obviously is an extreme, is very extreme. I think, that's more related, that's more extreme to the point of something like a Larry Nasser, where it's really, you know, just very hard to believe and hard to understand why, the league didn't act sooner to protect those players. I think that's the most disappointing piece to me is that, now we do know that, the league knew what was going on, and they allowed, in 2015, and they allowed him to get another coaching job within the league. And then again, they allowed him to get another coaching job, and end up finally with the North Carolina Courage. So that to me, and that's a pattern, right? He's not the only one where that happened. It happened in Earl Rain with Ben Stede, who, there were formal complaints from Lindsey Horan against him when she was at PSG, and they allowed him to come to, coach the Earl Rain in the NWSL. So that's a pattern that we're seeing is where formal complaints are made against coaches, but they're not taken seriously. The women aren't believed. They're not listened to. The coaches can, either get removed. There are situations where the coaches are removed and fired, but there's no formal statement saying why. If and in several cases, the coach was actually thanked for their contribution to the team after they were fired, and then they were allowed to move forward and get another job coaching women. So it feels like betrayal in a lot of ways. Meg Linehan has said that word in her article. She called it institutional betrayal. And that really is what it feels like. But it is common. It's not a surprise. Anyone in the soccer world knows it's been there.
See, and that's the thing is you say it's not a surprise to people outside of the NWSL world. It is a surprise to you and to people that are in the know. It's not, and that's what's so shocking about it. Not that we don't know about it or didn't know about it at the time, but that people did in large numbers seem to know about it within an organization that is a women's sports league. And
Yeah.
somehow it continued to go on for that long. How could it? I mean, what are you hearing as to the reasons that it was able to go on that long?
I think, it's not just in the NWSL, right? It's global. It's a global problem where women aren't listened to and women are, their complaints are ignored. They're the coach of the Canada, one of the youth national teams in Canada was accused of harassment. Recently, Sampson in England, the coach of the women's team, he was removed for harassment. Obviously, I don't know if you guys know the story about the women in Afghanistan who were sexually abused by the president of their federation. And they all, most recently then had to flee out of Afghanistan, right, with the help of the Australian government and some very amazing activists, Khalida Kopal, for one. And the women and the young players in Haiti have all been sexually abused. So the stories are out there and they're being reported. I think, it's the interesting piece is that it still feels like a surprise to mainstream American, culture. When, like it's not like these stories are just coming out in the media for the first time. They've always been there. It's just that, I think in this particular case, Meg Linehan has earned a ton of respect and a ton of credibility, working in women's soccer for the last 9 years or 10 years. And, her combined with someone like Molly Hensley Clancy at the Washington Post, who wasn't originally a sports writer. She was an investigative reporter. I credit to The Athletic and credit to the Washington Post for giving those, female reporters the support and the, backup and the finances to pay for lawyers. I mean, they, fact checked all these stories. They, got players to go on the record. I think the credibility of that reporting this year, particularly in August around the Washington Spirit, and then obviously with Meg Linehan and The Athletic around Paul Riley. And then also you got to remember now, finally, we have players like Alex Morgan who have a ton of public credibility and a ton of public influence. She has more social media followers than Tom Brady. So you have someone like her, and obviously a reputation for integrity and honesty. You have someone like her who's, lending her credibility to these players, Mana Shim and Sinead Farrelly, at the, in the players in Meg Linehan's article. And then all of a sudden it is a game changer. It takes a lot of very important people who are now above the hierarchy in like the power hierarchy in soccer, above the person like Paul Riley. You have to have people who aren't afraid for their jobs. Alex Morgan, Paul Riley can't stop Alex Morgan's career. So you have to have. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned Alex Morgan, and
yeah.
she's sort of spoken to what you've been talking about. I saw her say that women have been pulled away from playing soccer because of failures in how the system is set up for them, but added that things are changing as players stand up to their employers. What kind of system do you think needs to be put in place that will first protect these players and women, but second, still allow the league to thrive? Because I saw Heather O'Reilly say that soccer swept a lot of bad things under the rug in order to make sure the league was successful. So it seems like there's this contrast between wanting the limited opportunities there are to succeed, but at the same time raising your voice and creating headlines that may fly against that for these women.
Yeah. So, I think that's one very common theme in all of this is that, there was always the sort of overarching theme that, if we speak up, if we call out these scandals in women's soccer, it could potentially hurt the rise of our league. It could potentially hurt the growth of the league. And we've been fighting for so long to have a successful league, right? This is the third try at a women's soccer league in the United States, that we are protective of it and we don't want it to fail. And so I think, anything that was seen to threaten that, was, we were scared to do anything that was going to disrupt the growth of the league, right? And so, that was a sad piece to all of this, and a very sad piece to all this was that we, a lot of us sort of kept that sort of culture of silence going. because we were afraid to do anything to harm the growth of the league, of the game.
The culture of silence not only ended a couple weeks ago, it seemed to have raised the profile of the NWSL in a positive way. When you saw what the players were doing, where they were stopping games and locking arms, what was your reaction as somebody that has been involved in this and gone through this fight?
Again, I don't think I was surprised by how thoughtful and well planned out that protest was. Women athletes around the world have a long history of advocacy and activism, and we're one of the first to, as a league, do the Black Lives Matter, support the Black Lives Matter movement. So I thought that was a beautiful protest, to be honest with you. It was poignant. It was profound. The fact that they stopped play for 6 minutes, which represented the 6 years that Sinead Farley was trying to have someone listen to her and listen to her complaints, and the 6 years that Paul O'Reilly was still allowed to be in contact with players that like obviously continuing the abuse of players and her. And then obviously seeing that the Barclays Women's League, the women in England, in solidarity did the same protest in their next set of games. That to me, actually literally gives me chills just thinking about like the global solidarity that's growing in the women's game. And I think it's, sadly, I think, like the NWSL always prided itself on being the best women's league in the world. I think that this is this is a continuation of that in a way, in a sad way, because I think hopefully this will set an example, or at least allow other leagues and other girls to, also end this culture of silence and put in place, anti-harassment policies, but not just the anti-harassment policies, but the the system of independent investigation and the culture of just sweeping this stuff under the rug and allowing these guys to fail forward. They're failing, they're abusing players, and then they're landing on their feet, right? It doesn't make sense. It has to stop.
With the things that you're talking about, the governors, basically, the things that are put on place to stop this from happening, are you confident now that these things are going to happen, that this will, not that it will never happen again, because you can't guarantee that, but that there is now enough empowerment that it will stop, or that if it happens, it'll be brought to light immediately and rectified?
That's a really good question. I think we're closer to that than we've ever been in the NWSL. I think the players have a lot of power now. I think, but you gotta imagine how many players, only 3 players went on record speaking out, right? So imagine how many players are still afraid to speak out because they're still afraid of retaliation. They're still afraid of what's going to happen to their career, still afraid of their coaches, still afraid of their owners and their general managers. So, I think, confident that things are going to change right away. I can't say that, but I am hopeful. I do think that the players have shifted the power balance now. And, obviously, the commissioner had to resign. Also, general counsel, Lisa Levine for the NWSL had to resign. And, the NWSLPA has earned a lot of respect and a lot of credibility. They're the ones that put in place the hotline. The NWSLPA is paying for the hotline, anonymous hotline for players right now. The league hasn't stepped in and said they're going to pay for that yet.
Which is embarrassing, frankly.
It's embarrassing.
How do you, and I'm asking you to have to take that, but that's my own opinion. Like, how is it that you have your commissioner go, your head of legal go, and you're still making the players pay for the hotline to report all the things that made all these people go?
Right.
It just makes no sense to me. But it leads to the question I have about the larger reckoning we're seeing across sports for women and athletes. You mentioned Larry Nassar at the start, and it was gut-wrenching to watch the women gymnasts who were Olympic heroes have to testify before Congress about how many years they were ignored for. Now you have these women's soccer athletes who have the same thing. How do you think the next phase of this goes as people continue to step forward and speak their truth? Are we going to see more revelations that people have known about that are secret? Is it just going to stop? What do you think happens now?
I'm hoping that now that the system is in place, the anti-harassment policy seems well. I have it here. It's actually very clear. I think there was a lot of gray area where players didn't really know if they were being abused or not. Obviously, it's a strange thing, right? Because we do have a lot of coaches screaming at players. Like that's a normalized thing. I mean, I go out and watch my kids play sports, and the coaches are yelling at them. Everybody's yelling at everybody, right? So there's a lot of gray area, but I think that at least particularly in the case of this, anti-harassment policy for the NWSL, it's very clear. It's 15 pages. It's very clear. And I think going forward, it's going to be a lot harder for these things for the bad actors to call it a gray area anymore.
What do you think are going to be the next steps?
I think the next steps has to be, it's all about transparency, right? It's all about like these independent investigations. It's all about transparency. I think that when Christy Hawley was fired from Louisville, I think he was the only one that was where the club gave a reason for his firing. That was cause. He was fired for cause. I think other than that, we got these statements from the league where it was, or from the clubs that said, he's moving on. Thank you for his contribution. So I think that has to stop, right? We have to actually get independent investigations, and the results of the investigations have to be made public.
Well, and that is the one thing you mentioned, that there haven't been a lot of people still that have come forward.
Right.
And so what has to happen now, right now, to make sure that happens? Do the Alex Morgans of the world have to do more? I mean, they've done so much already, but is there something more that the people that are the stars of the sport can do to help protect the ones that aren't the stars of the sport, that may feel like they have less power than she does?
Or is it more than just the players? Is it the role that Jeff and I have in the media and other media members? Is it elected officials? Like, is it larger than just the athletes? Are we putting an unfair burden on them for that?
I think it's definitely on the athletes. They've been carrying that leadership weight for a long time, and I think they'll continue to do that because they love the game and they love their teammates and they love the league. But yes, I think the media has a powerful role in this. I think even just having telling more women's stories, having me on to talk about these issues, I think is a huge help. I said that to you guys, first when I was on over the summer. We need to shift that we need to shift that balance between men's and women's stories being told in the media, because like we were talking about, like those stories are out there. Now that it's come into sort of the national eye, the national view, that like we just now, I think everybody, it's almost like, this is a silly example, but how like when somebody tells you about a certain car and then all of a sudden you see that car everywhere. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that now that this has come into sort of like a national awareness, people will start seeing these stories and paying more attention and keeping them going and digging a little deeper, and not just and also like in our own lives, like if I think all of us have heard stories where there's maybe a rumor that something inappropriate is going on with a parent or a coach or a player, and a lot of the times we just let those things go because we assume that the governing body or the person in charge, the administration, will run its course and take action and work it out without us having to step in. But I think we all need to take a responsibility and say, all right, well, maybe it is on us to step in. Maybe it's maybe we can't exactly trust that the administrators in those clubs are going to step in. Maybe we need to force that a little more.
Well, and as you saw, the other story that's come out in the last couple of weeks, the last week, is with John Gruden, and you see the stories of things that he said, the misogynistic things he said. There were so many things that are said in those emails over a long period of time to a lot of people that were in power. Yeah. And they're only now coming out because apparently the owner didn't do enough the first time. And when you see those kinds of things, do you think that something positive can come out of something like that? that maybe that drawing the spotlight on the NFL and all of these leagues will help the dialogue happen? Or do you think that are you concerned that all it does is they get rid of the one person and then they move on?
No, I really do hope that it's a huge, cultural shift. I do hope the movement carries into men's sports and carries into youth sports. I think if we do, if every organization has a policy, if every company has a policy where, harassment of any kind is not allowed, if there's a zero tolerance for harassment of any kind, I think that that's a really good first step. I think, you guys know, and I've been in it, and, my dad was a tough cookie. So, there's a lot of verbal abuse that goes on in sports, and some of it is completely normalized. I think, we have a long way to go in changing that. I really am hopeful that this is the beginning of that shift.
Well, you talked about youth sports. I'm out of the youth sports game now that my kid has grown, but
I'll
I
be
did
getting
see
in
that.
it with my young kids.
Well, no, but that's it's a problem.
Be careful.
Yeah, I mean, Susie, you see that now. I saw that my son had when he was young a coach who would scream at the kids to the point that there was stuff coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And some of us stood up and said we can't have that. Are you seeing more of that? Are you seeing organized sports going in a more positive direction of respecting others?
I sadly am not, and I'm worried about it, to be honest with you. I've very recently seen incidents of coaches berating, teenage girls to the point where referees have had to step in. The worry of the person that's supposed to be reporting it is that they're going to hurt, they're going to hurt their child's chances of getting recruited, or their child's chance, there's going to be retaliation from the coach. I mean, it's all the same themes that we're seeing in the NWSL and youth sports. I don't see a lot of it changing. I know, thank goodness, you still have programs like AYSO where, every coach has to go through 6 hours of training, anti-harassment training and positivity training. And so I do know that there are organizations that are trying to do good and trying to change sort of that culture. I just hope it continues. I hope it grows. I do feel bad for these kids because they, I do believe that there's a lot of verbal abuse that goes on in youth sports.
Well, we're definitely going to want to keep talking about it with you because of the perspective that you bring to it, and we appreciate the time. But before we go, I want to close on a happier note. Ted Lasso. You're a Ted Lasso fan.
Oh my God. Yes, of course.
So in fairness, I told Jeff, I haven't seen the last episode yet, and I'm avoiding all of the rumors and spoilers.
We should ruin it.
Don't ruin it for me.
He's had days to do it. And I keep telling him he should have watched it because to me, it was the best episode ever.
Jeff tells me regularly he loves this show because at the end of it, he finds himself smiling and feeling happy in a world where there isn't all of that. How exciting is it for you to see a show about soccer that does that for people? And clearly, as a soccer player, it's real enough for you that you've been able to enjoy it a little bit.
And talks about
I absolutely love it.
Yeah, and it talks about respect. And that's why to me, that's why the show is different, is because the lead character, there's not the twist that all of a sudden he's going to do something horrible. It's him always trying to connect with people and respect their opinion.
Yep. And they have a diverse team, right? There's people from all over the world on their team. I just think their positive attitude is catchy. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like, you can't, and like his little things that he says, like, forget about it, be like a guppy. It's the best. And I have a personal, I personally connect with it even deeper because, my father was an American football player, and he once did try to coach us in soccer. So I kind of I can definitely, relate to that feeling of Ted Lasso, just walking into a soccer game and being like, trying to come into it with the American football mentality. And he's like, and what's that offside thing again? Tell me what that corner, why are we doing a corner kick? So I just love it from all sides. And I obviously, the female owner of the club, and there's a lot of good female characters in the show, which is, I think, is always really important.
It it seems to
And
show that
yeah, it's just fun. It's lighthearted, it's funny, and it has a great heart. And they talk about mental illness. They have the doctor that comes in, the psychologist that comes in. I think she's one of my favorite characters in the whole thing. Yeah, it's great. I just love it.
it seems to show the best of sports, the overcoming the adversity, but at the same time keeping the respect for each other and the diversity that you have with sports bringing people together. So we figure that's a good place to end it for this time. Susie, we hope that this story starts to make change. We don't want to keep having this conversation with you. We'd like to have different ones. But until that happens, we appreciate you giving us time so that we understand what's going on.
Yeah, I thank you. Thank you guys. I really am grateful to be here. And obviously, I appreciate when you guys let me come on.
Always a good time. Thanks so much.